Hi, welcome back. I'm hoping this goes a little bit smoother. This is section 13.2. This is dealing with your homework number 12. So I'm going to kind of recap just a little bit on this example number 1 as far as doing the trig ratios. Right now, ignore at the bottom of this, it says calculator. I'm going to get to that here in a minute. So let's start out with the trig ratios. So now the point of all of this is to figure out what angle measurements are. That's what trig ratios are for. So if you look at angle A's perspective right here, I'm looking for the sine. Remember, sine is opposite. So I'm taking opposite is 3 over the hypotenuse, which is 5. So sine is always opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine for angle A is the 4, which is the adjacent, or the side touching it, over the hypotenuse. And finally, tangent of A is the opposite over adjacent. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at the perspective of B. Okay, B, the opposite now is 4 over the hypotenuse. The adjacent now is 3 over the hypotenuse, so it's 3 over 5. And finally, tangent is is the opposite, which is 4 over 3. Now, if you notice something, that the sine of A and the cosine of B are the same, 3/5, and also the cosine of A and sine of B are the same, 4/5, and the tangents are the reciprocal, or the fraction flipped, so 3/4 and 4/3. Now, the point of this now is to find out what the angle measurements are. So that's why it's important to understand trig ratios. So a lot of us have different kind of calculators. That's why I put how to do the direction angles at the bottom. So if you're using the graphing calculator, if you're trying to figure out a sine right here of sine of A, you'd do your second number, which is the orange, yellow, green button at the top left. Hit second, and then the sine, because we're using sine. And then in parentheses, put in 3/5. Now, if you come up and you do this correctly, you should get 36.9. Now, if you're not getting that on the graphing calculators only, there's a mode button right in the top middle. If you click on that, it'll give you some options. It'll say like radian and degrees. Put it in degrees. Now, those that have got scientific calculators, you would want to do parentheses right here, 3/5 in parentheses, the second and sine, and you should get the same value, 36.9. Now let's do the cosine. Now, what happens is when you type the second and sine in, you got a little -1 up above every one of these. That's the inverse. It's trying to figure out what the angle is by doing the trig ratios. So now do the cosine. So for the graphing or the scientific calculators, you would want to, instead of putting 3/5 like you did in for sine, you would do 4/5 second, and now cosine. Graphing calculators do the same, do second, sine, and then in parentheses 3/5. And what you should come up with is the same number. Same thing with tangent. You want to use that second button with tangent and put in 3/4 in parentheses. And for practice, continue to do this with B. Now, angle B's, do the exact same process with angle B's. So for the sine, you would put in those with the scientific calculator. You'd put in parentheses 4/5 second and sine, because that's what we're using to find sine of B. And you should come up with 53.1. I'm going to give you some time to work on this. Now, as we're working at this, all of your A's should be the same measurement, as well as your angle B's. Now, notice something as well as we're concluding, trying to figure out these angle measurements. Notice that A plus B has to be 90 degrees because we already have a 90 degrees right here that I'm shading in, 90 degrees. Triangle has 180, so that's 90 available. So then I need to put in 36.9 degrees for A. B is 53.1 degrees. Come up to be 90 degrees. Now, one thing that they're going to mention in your homework assignments, and I know we kind of struggle a little bit with this through the semester with significant digits, but if I scroll down significant digits, if it's in a degree, whether it's like 63 degrees or 141 degrees, as long as there's not a decimal, you always round the side, these right here, these are your sides, to 2 significant digits for if it's just a degree. If it's got 1 decimal, you would do 3 significant digits for the sides. And if you do have 2 decimals, that means that the sides should have 4 significant digits. So I've got some examples here. Now on the left, I've got degrees. On the right, I've got sides. So by looking at this, at the first example, I've got 51 degrees. Now notice there's no decimal. So you treat this as 1 degrees right here. That means the side would have 2 significant digits. 49.2, you got 1 decimal, same thing as the 1 decimal as a 0.1. That means the side would have, if we were trying to figure out the sides and everything, that you would round it to the 3 significant digits. Now going looking at the sides, we have to go reverse. So sides I'm looking at over here. I'm going to kind of mark this, the sides. 15. 15 has 2 significant digits. So that means that your angle has to be rounded to 1 whole decimal. Or degree, I'm sorry, not decimal, degree. 175, you would have 3 significant digits. So that means your degree would have to have 1 decimal in it. Now I'm going to have 2 examples coming up that we're going to figure out what angles A and B are. And we're going to use our significant digits to round. So here's my first triangle. Now, we're trying to figure out A and B. Now, it doesn't matter which one you try to choose first. I always do alphabetical order. I will always, or pretty much try to always, figure out what angle A is. So I'm looking at angle A's perspective. So then I'm looking at both of my measurements. I've got a 28.5 and a 21.3. So I'm looking at A. 28.5 is opposite. I'm going to just abbreviate OPP for opposite. And the 21.3 it's the adjacent because the hypotenuse is always opposite of the 90. So really this is our C, this is our opposite. So I'm just using, I'm going to abbreviate ADJ for adjacent. Now, what is opposite over adjacent? It comes out to be tangent. So tangent of A equals 28.5 over 21.3. Now, these are like the trig ratios that we had up at the my first example from this lesson. So we need to go ahead and I'm going to just, because most of us had the scientific calculator, I want you to put in 28.5 over 21.3 in parentheses, and then hit second and tangent. Should come up with 5.32267, something like this. Now, as far as your significant digits are concerned, since this is a sine or an angle, because we're trying to figure out what our angle is, hold on for a second, guys. I'm sorry about this. I put my decimal in wrong. It should be 53. You erase this just for a second. Should be 53.2267. Now, since my sides have got 3 significant digits, that means my angle should have a 0.1 or a 1 decimal. So that means I'm looking at this 2 right here. What would this round to? Well, that means angle A is going to be 53.2 degrees. So now I need to figure out what angle B is. So angle B, I'm looking at the perspective of angle B. So I'm using B, the 21.3, that's opposite. The 28.5 is the adjacent. So I know that that's going to be opposite over adjacent. We're still using tangent. So then on our calculators, you want to put in this ratio in parentheses and then hit second and tangent, and B comes out to be, I believe it's 36.7732. Now we need to still round it to 3, or to the 1 decimal right here. So what happens to that 7 is B becomes 36.8. So if you add both of these together, 53.2 degrees plus 36.8, you get that 90 degrees. Both A and B always will have to equal 90 degrees. Now, I want you all to do all these ratios for A and B. Please do not subtract 53.2 from 90, because if you do one of the ratios wrong, it's going to throw out the whole problem. And this gives us some practice with this. Now, I want you all to, if you want to pause this, think about this for a second, and then you can unpause it, and then I'm going to explain it. So I'm looking at angle A's perspective. Now A is opposite over, now the 45.8 is the hypotenuse. I'm going to just write HYP for hypotenuse. So that means what I'm going to do, opposite over hypotenuse, if you can recall back in our previous notes, that is going to be sine. So sine of A equals 35.20 over 45.85. Now, for our scientific calculators, we take this ratio, put it in parentheses, hit your second and sine, And A comes out to be 50.1. And if I look at B's perspective, B now, if I'm looking at the 35.20, that is my adjacent over my hypotenuse, because that 45.85 is still hypotenuse. So this is going to be opposite over, adjacent over hypotenuse. We're going to use cosine. So cosine of B equals my ratio, which is now 35.20 over 45.85. Put that in parentheses, do second and cosine, and when you do this, it should come out to be 39.85 degrees. And if you add both of them up, you get 90 degrees. Now, I'm going to give you all just a quick tidbit on this, is if you're giving both sides but not the hypotenuse, you will always use tangent. If you're given one side and the hypotenuse, the longer leg that's opposite of the 90-degree angle, you will use one of them would be sine, the other one would be cosine. Now I'm going to wrap this up with values. Now, if you're given a degree, and it doesn't matter what function you're using, I'm going to use every one of these functions. All you have to do is just type these in. Put in sine of 49.6, and you should get something like this. If you do cosine of 55.2, you should get something like this right here. Same thing with tangent. Now, since you got since it's every one of these have got one decimal, that means you're going to have 3 significant digits. So all I'm doing is I'm marking the third significant digit in each one of these. So this is what our answers should look like. 0.76, that 1 turns into a 2. 0.57, the 0 turns into a 1. And the last one, 2.1, the 7, actually in this case, stays the same. Now, if I give you if you see this with homework or on a test, and you see like any kind of trig functions with letters, and then something with decimals, a number that's not in degree, this is when you have to put in. So for our graphing calculators, you would put in 0.7941, do your second and sine, similar to how we did our fractions. And if you do it this way, you should get something like 52.57. Now, I don't have to round anything because this has got 4 significant digits, meaning I'm going to have 2 decimals. Same thing with cosine. Those with our graphing calculator, all you have to do is just put in second cosine and type in the 0.4602, and you should, in this case, come up with, I believe it's like 6260. And finally, same thing with tangent. You do those with the graphing calculator, put in 1.386 second button and tangent, and I believe you should get something like this right here. Now, all of this is related to your homework number 12. I hope this helps, and I'm hoping here in the next couple of days to put in another video, audio lecture online. Thank you very much.